Hey, good evening. Welcome to episode 11 of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. I'm Graham Dorn here with Carrie Miller. Same people as always, and the same topic as always, bracketology.
One seeds?
Yeah,
Taylor,
well,
Taylor Swift?
let's start with one seeds. Speaking of one seeds, how many teams do you think are still realistically in the one seed conversation?
Yeah.
So not just like a long shot, but some team that has like a 10% or more chance of making the tournament
Yeah,
as a one
you
seed.
said you said 10%. I feel like that's kind of a random, like trying to put a percentage on it is really tough, but I would say there are 12 teams that still have a chance. One of them in name only, but we'll get to that. Certainly, right now, I believe we have the same ones: Purdue, Houston, Connecticut, not in that order. Purdue, Connecticut, Houston, and then Arizona as the last one. Kind of a toss up between Arizona and Tennessee. Really came down to as simple as 5-3 versus Q1 to 4-4 versus Q1. I mean, it's more than that. I didn't just specifically look at that, but as we've discussed before, Tennessee just doesn't have those top tier wins. Even though they are 4-3 against Q1A, they just don't have the Q1AA wins. So it's those five. I think North Carolina is certainly still in it. Kansas, Marquette, Baylor, Iowa State. We can talk about Iowa State in a minute. Auburn definitely because of their metrics. Even though I still have Auburn as a 4 seed, if they get hot, their metrics are good enough that they could get there. And then the one in name only is Duke. Duke has 5 quad 1 wins. They're 0-3 against quad 2, but if they were to win out and finish whatever that would be, 27-5 or something, I think there's still a shot, even though it is a pretty terrible ACC. But if they get 2 wins over North Carolina down the stretch, one of them coming in the ACC championship, I mean, we always say that Duke, you got to bump them up a seed line no matter what, because the committee's going to do that. But I think they still have a outside chance, maybe 8%, not quite 10%.
The only thing I'm wondering is if you include Duke, do you include Alabama too?
No, I don't, because
Why?
Alabama already has 7 losses. I think Duke pretty much needs to win out. Alabama would get close if they get. I mean, they only have one quad 1A win right now. I don't know. I didn't exactly look at their remaining schedule to know for sure what else they have on the docket, but I don't think they can get there, even though they do have the metrics. But Auburn has 2, 3 fewer losses than Alabama, 3 fewer losses. So I think they're much more likely to get a 1 seed than Alabama
I can buy all that, and I
is.
think for me the real question is whether Baylor and Iowa State, you kind of mentioned them, whether they can make a real run at this thing.
Yeah,
And I think if Baylor wins at Kansas this weekend, Baylor will make a real run at
yeah,
this thing. I have them ninth overall.
me too.
I think they're in good shape. Um, Iowa State also has at least 4 quadrant 1 wins, just like Baylor. And I think their predictive metrics show they're for real. They've already got the win over Houston, the win over Kansas. I think those are the two that are really kind of just like hanging out there, right on the precipice of joining the top 2 seed lines. Marquette, if they win the Big East, I think that could happen. I
Yeah,
don't expect that to happen, but I mean that's kind of to me the lingering question is will a team from the Big East and the Big 12 join UConn and Houston? Because I just don't think they're dropping off. I do not
no,
feel like either of those teams are dropping off. So do we get a second team from those leagues, or do we get an outright champion like a Tennessee and North Carolina and Arizona? I tend to believe it's going to be an outright champion of the ACC, the SEC, or the Pac-12 over a second team from the Big 12 or the Big East, but we'll know soon enough because the powerful conference wins are there for the Big East and the Big 12. The Big East has pretty much every team in the conference is on the bubble.
yeah,
So I mean there's quality win opportunities all over the Big East. Big 12 we know I think nobody's really arguing it's not the best conference this year. I think there's an argument that maybe some of the stats are a little inflated because of playing so many games against Quad 4.
correct.
But even if that's the case, I don't think anybody really believes it's not the best conference.
Yeah,
So tons of quality win opportunities out there. For me, if I had to guess the one team that I think is most likely to get a number 1 seed at the end of the day, it's Tennessee. I think Tennessee is the most likely team to have a great mix between a challenging schedule down the stretch and winnable games.
yeah,
It's both challenging and winnable, whereas I feel like North Carolina and Arizona are going to run into the problem of having maybe not the
Too many quad two games,
two, yeah,
meaningless games. Yeah, yeah.
just not the right mix to kind of get you over that line. So I think Tennessee is my pick for who's most likely to get there.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that Arizona right now has the edge on Tennessee because Arizona's done a better job at the very top of the bracket than Tennessee has.
Yeah. Certainly, as we've discussed in the past when it was Arizona versus Kansas for the last one seed, or Arizona versus North Carolina. Now it's Arizona versus Tennessee. Still got those two terrible losses to Stanford and Oregon State. The Washington State loss doesn't look bad anymore. It's actually Washington State, I think, pretty solidly in. Not a lock by any means, but right now I don't think there's really any case to leave them out. But how would you feel as a college basketball fan if Iowa State gets a one seed after doing nothing in November and December? They're all right, so they beat Iowa at home in that, annual rivalry game. They got a little bit screwed in the Big 12 Big East challenge by drawing DePaul. It's not their fault they got the worst possible Big East game. But they also got lucky their first game of the season against Green Bay. Green Bay went 3-29 last season. They were 361st on KenPom. They were picked to finish in last in the Horizon League, behind IUPUI and Detroit Mercy, who is winless right now. Green Bay was supposed to be worse than them, and that's probably Iowa State's third best non-conference win. So, like, I look at their resume, it's like, yeah, absolutely. You keep winning, you got a case for a one seed. In the back of my head, I would hate it so much if they get a one seed because it will just send the message that what you do in November, December doesn't matter as long as you're good enough in January and February.
What I hate about it even more
You're a Kansas fan.
Is that Iowa State got a nice Big 12 draw. They did. Texas Tech, Iowa State. There's a few teams, BYU. They just got good draws in the Big 12. They didn't have a lot of home and homes against the top
Yeah.
teams, and in fact, sometimes they just got the game at home. They don't even get the road game. So I think that to me is kind of the bigger thing that I think as a college basketball fan I loved that we had the Big East and the Big 12, two power conferences. You get home and home every game, and at the end, you say, this team deserved the title because they had to run
Yep.
home and back each way. And I just feel like as a college basketball fan, it's sad to see that go away. It's not honestly it's not even about like Kansas having a better chance to win the conference or not. It's more so I just hate losing home and homes because it was one of the last pure things of college basketball was knowing that you're going to go there, but they're going to have to come to your
Yeah.
place too.
Yeah. I don't want Iowa State. And I got nothing against Iowa State. They're a solid team. I just hate it.
Moving on,
Yeah.
Auburn and Alabama had their second matchup of the year. Auburn was dominant for most of it.
Yep.
Really great environment. Lots of
Fouls.
points, lots of fouls. Uh, what did this mean to Auburn to kind of control from start to finish such an important game?
Yeah, I don't even think it's controlling from start to finish. I don't think it really mattered because they had the eye test, they had the metrics for sure. They just needed that marquee win. So it's what we talked about, 3 days ago, a week ago, whenever it was. All they did was win at Ole Miss, which is, as we'll get to shortly, very much a bubble team. Uh, you know, might not even be a quad one win by the end of the season. They just needed that win to back up their metrics. And I think, again, I still have them as a four. I'm not ready to go nuts and put them all the way up because I had as a seven before that win over Ole Miss. But I think that was massive for them and really didn't hurt Alabama at all. I think I actually may have messed up and still have Alabama right ahead of Auburn, but I do 14 and 15. But yeah, I think that was a much needed win for Auburn, and I barely watched any of it because it was over by the time I put my daughter to bed.
So I've got a trivia question for
All
you.
right, trivia.
And clearly it relates to this game, otherwise I wouldn't be asking it right now. How many teams have ever gotten a 3 seed or higher, so a 2 seed or a 1 seed, when they've had a losing record against Quadrant 1?
In in the net era, just in the past
Yeah,
5 years, or
because they didn't really kind of
yeah.
do the quads much before that.
Uh, see. I was close with the trivia last time. I think I said 6. It was 4. I'm going to say 0.
Exactly. 0. And I moved Auburn up to 12th overall based on this win over Alabama. If you look at Auburn, they're now 2-3 against Quadrant 1, but they are top 10 in every single metric. Alabama's top 15 in every metric, but they're just 3-6
Yep.
against Quad 1. Both those teams not looking great in Quad 1. Auburn not as bad. The thing we've been talking about with Auburn for so long is the lack of Quad 1 wins, but at least they have a better win percentage than Alabama. Alabama's 3 out of 9
Yeah.
chances.
1 in 5
That's
against the top half of
brutal.
it too. Yeah.
That's brutal. So for me, I think Alabama has to fall down to the 4 line. That's where I have them now, 13th overall, and I moved Auburn up to 12th overall, but I don't feel good about it for that exact trivia question,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you're on the committee, you're talking about who takes advantage of their chances. Auburn really hasn't much either. This was one of the first times they've actually taken advantage of a
Yeah.
good opportunity. And as you talked about, Ole Miss wasn't that great of an opportunity in the first place. So this was the first real big game they got, and it was at home. And I don't know, is Alabama as great as everybody thinks they are? That defense sure isn't great. So I don't know. I don't feel good about having Auburn at 12th overall because I still feel like it's a little inflated, and I'm curious, are they going to do what they need to do to make us feel comfortable about that, which is just get some more wins down the stretch, or are they going to end up kind of limping in with a bad quad one record? And in that case, they might have an awesome overall record, awesome efficiency, but I think I'm going to have to put them at a 4 or lower if that's the case because they're just not doing enough against quad one. If you want to be at the top of the bracket, you have to win not just against other teams outside of quad one, but you really got to win in quad one. That's what separates you from everybody else.
Yeah. You need to win at least one quad one game to make the tournament. You need to win like 4 or more to be a 4 seed or better, pretty much. But so you're saying you had to choose between Auburn and Alabama for that last 3 seed, uh, and I have Dayton there still, and it's the same thing. Where it's just like, man, I don't feel great about this, and I have Duke at 13, right ahead of Alabama and Auburn because they have as many quad one wins as those two teams combined. Yeah, I think that 12 spot overall is still really tough because Baylor, Iowa State, very solidly there at 9 and 10 for me. I think they are clearly 3 seeds. I forget who I have at 11.
Wisconsin, if I had to guess.
Yep, yeah,
Yep.
Wisconsin. They're like no threat to drop to a 4, and then Dayton at 12, Duke at 13, and then I start to consider those SEC teams who have great metrics, just not the results yet.
Yep. Moving on, let's talk about the Big East.
Oh boy.
We mentioned earlier they've got
switch pads here.
a very large bubble
Yeah.
contingent in the Big East. We've basically got Connecticut's locked in. I think you could argue Marquette's locked in. Either if they're not, they're going to be locked in soon, and we'd assume the same thing will happen with Creighton.
Yes.
So really, we're basically talking about, I don't know, no DePaul, no Georgetown, and then not those 3 teams. Everybody else
Yep.
seems to be in play. How do you, when you have so many teams on the bubble in the Big East, kind of start to break that down and rank them?
Yeah, it's really tough because resume metrics alone, right? At KPI SOR, Butler 48, Providence 52, Xavier 55, St. John's 56, Seton Hall 56 and a half. No separation whatsoever. I think Villanova at 12 and 11 overall, they're out probably permanently unless they can really play their way back in. But they're down to 68 in the resume metrics. They have too many bad losses. I think Villanova's probably done after that loss to Xavier. But I mean, I have Butler as a 10 seed, Seton Hall's an 11, St. John's as a 12, and Providence and Xavier among my first 3 or 4 out. And it is really hard to separate between them. And I mean, St. John's 0 and 5 against Quad 1. I just said you got to win Quad 1 to get in. I still have St. John's just barely in because I think their metrics are just barely good enough. They don't have, any horribly terrible losses. But yeah, every time if it weren't for like inertia, if I wasn't looking at my previous bracket and trying to decide whether or not to move teams, I'd probably end up shuffling those 5 teams like almost every time. Like there's so little separating them.
Yeah, I think it's been a challenge trying to separate them. The team that I think goes to the top of the pack, It's got to be Butler, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Just because of those wins at Marquette, at Creighton,
Yes.
those stand out. Right now, for me, Butler's actually my best 10 seed.
Okay.
So um, they're kind of they're on the bubble, but they're in that good spot of the bubble where you got a little bit of wiggle room to mess with because of those two marquee wins. I then have Seton Hall
Yep.
just because they're 4-4 against Quad One.
Mm-hmm.
Providence is my last team in the bracket right now.
No arguments.
4-5 against Quad One. They've got the Marquette win, Wisconsin win added, a Creighton win,
Yeah.
all at home again. Just kind of throwing out this. It's kind of been Providence's MO for a few years
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
They get their big wins at home, which is not atypical for college basketball, but it's more skewed for them than I
Yeah.
think for most teams. St. John's and Xavier in that order, but I think they're both pretty darn close. And actually, if you break it out, quad one, quad two, look at their quad splits. Both are 2-7 against quadrant one. Both are 5-1 against quadrant two. Why I have St. John's ahead of Xavier is just because Xavier has two bad losses in quad three. St. John's only has one. That's that Michigan home loss early in the year. So
Yeah.
I think very, very, very similar resumes between St. John's and Xavier, and I think any one result could move one of those teams maybe up into the bracket, and one bad result could maybe cost them a tournament bid too. Like
Yeah.
that's how close they are to being in my field.
Yeah. I was obviously, you just mentioned St. John's is 2-7 Q1. I was looking top half of quad one. They're 0-5 against Q1A. So they've blown all their marquee chances. But yeah, they do have a couple of wins, and as I was saying it, I was like, do I seriously have a team in the field with no quad one wins? Because I know I have several with 4 quad one wins out, so that would have been a Richmond level error on my behalf. But yeah, I mean exactly what you said. Like I think there's absolutely a case for Providence. Again, it's kind of just inertia for me, where I had Providence a few ticks out because of how disappointing they've looked without Bryce Hopkins prior to last night's win over Creighton. I mean, that moved them right to the cut line for me. And now if I were to just come in cold and compare Providence to Michigan State, I'd have a hard time going with Michigan State over Providence right now. But again, inertia the other way. We already had Michigan State like as a 9 or 10, so it's like, oh, we can't drop them that far for a loss to Minnesota, can we? But Michigan State is very bubbly right now. We can talk about them in a little bit if we want.
Um, Continuing the bubble conversation, let's shift to the SEC.
Mm.
How do you rank the SEC bubble teams? Who's at the top? Who's at the bottom? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think similar to the Big East, you got one team that's kind of in the bubble conversation, but also definitely out in Georgia. I don't know if we're even really considering the Bulldogs anymore. 0-4 Quad 1A, 1-5 against Quad 1. I have Texas A&M as a 9 seed. They're the top of that SEC bubble for me. 4-4 Quad 1. Metrics across the board are okay. They do have 2 Q3 losses, which is concerning. I know that's probably why you've had them just barely in your field for a while. Florida's the one I don't know what to do with, man. 1-7 against Quad One, but nothing close to a bad loss. So I have them as my top 10 seed right now. I don't like it. 30th in the resume metrics, 32 in the predictives. So I have a hard time going any lower than 40 with them, but I also can't justify putting them as a 30 to 32. And then I have Ole Miss and Mississippi State among my last 4 in. I I feel like the Dayton is kind of perfect for Ole Miss, where they're 19th in the resume metrics. Like they have to be in, but the committee's going to tell them you have to play an extra game because you're not that good.
Yeah, I think Florida is the tricky one
Yeah.
more than any other team. I think Texas A&M. We've talked about them for weeks at this point. Like they're tricky too,
Yeah.
in a different way. Florida's the super tricky one. Actually, Florida a little bit above Texas A&M as a 10 seed. They are just 1-7 against Quad One, but as you mentioned, they're top 31 in both strength of record and KPI, and their efficiency metrics are pretty good too. We did see with Illinois last year that you don't have to have a great quad one record to be comfortably in the bracket. Illinois was a 9 seed, and they were looking at 2-11
Yeah.
in quad one last year. Still landed a 9 seed. I'm not saying Florida should be a 9 seed, but I am saying there is precedent for the committee kind of saying, well, yeah, not great in quad one, but everything else kind of lines up. So,
And it definitely doesn't hurt that their one great win was on the road against Kentucky. That's one of those
yep,
bump them up a seed line type of bonus wins.
yep, absolutely.
Even though Kentucky's not that good.
Leave us alone, Big Blue Nation. That's at Carrance James on Twitter. Leave me alone.
Come at me.
Texas A&M 4-4 versus quad one, but as you mentioned the two quad three losses. That's why I think they're just below Florida. Mississippi State top 44 in every single metric. Why I think they're really on the edge of being out of the bracket and in the first four for me right now. They lost at home to Southern. Like, that's just a bad loss. Ole Miss, you mentioned 19th in resume average, but they're only 67th in efficiency.
Yep.
And more than that, there's a second thing that I think could hurt them with the committee. Do you know how
Chris
many
Beard factor?
off the top of your head, how many quad one and quad two combined wins does Ole Miss have?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think they only have one quad one win. They have two. So they're 4-5 against quad one and quad two, yeah.
Not a bad win percentage against quad one and quad two. Not great, but not bad either. But that's a very low volume. They've done.
How many does Michigan State have?
But Ole Miss, it would be one thing. I really do feel like this is a big factor with them. It would be one thing if they had those resume metrics and a higher volume of games played.
Yeah, I don't understand their resume metrics, but I see them. I see their top 20.
They
That's
were
hard
great
to
against
ignore.
quad three, and there's something to be said for that. But if their efficiency is that bad,
Yeah.
and they don't really have the great quad one and quad two wins to throw on there, I think their resume metrics aren't going to be as respected as pretty much every other team.
Was it Ole Miss or was it Memphis that won by one against Detroit Mercy? I think it was Ole Miss, which explains their efficiency, but could also explain Memphis's. And I'm confusing them because I know Ole Miss played Memphis, and it was a conversation the whole time. But that was, yeah, they just won close games over and over again. I made this point before. They were 82nd on KenPom to start the season, went 13-0, and were still 82nd on KenPom. Like, they did nothing efficiency-wise to prove that they had been better than preseason expectations, which was, I think they were picked 10th in the SEC. Like, they weren't supposed to be good. We still don't know if they actually are. So yeah, I'm not convinced by Ole Miss at all. If they didn't have that resume metric, I'd probably have them out. But it's, we have the data from years past. Like, if you're high enough in KPI and SOR, you get in. That's just the way it goes.
Yep. Georgia, you kind of mentioned. It's interesting whether they're even on the bubble at this point. They're like right on the very, very edge of the bubble to the point where you're like, do I even keep this team as under consideration or not? They're 3-9 against quad 1-2. Like, I don't know. We're gonna know soon enough, but they are like one more loss, and then there's just bye Georgia. We won't think about them again the rest of the year.
Yeah, I posted my whiteboard last night, and it had virtual locks, comfortably in. I don't remember what I called it. Bubble, and then not dead yet. And even the not dead yet probably should have been broken into like almost bubbly, sort of alive, and I just can't justify deleting you, but I really want to. And Georgia's in that category. Boston College is in that category. Washington is in that category. Just like, if they got hot for 3 weeks, I would have to add them to the list. I'd rather erase a team than write one in later.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great description of it because they have enough going for them that I can see where the committee would look at them and say, well, they're worth a look.
Yeah.
And then they would look and instantly say no, but they're worth a look.
They're 61.5 resume metric. So they're right there with like Seton Hall. Obviously, they don't have the quality wins that Seton Hall has, but they could get them in SEC play in a hurry. I'm not looking at their schedule. I don't know what they have coming up, but I assume there are plenty of quad one opportunities left for them. So you have to keep them in the conversation.
Speaking of Seton Hall.
Yes.
Last four in, first four out. Who are your last four teams in the bracket?
We got Seton Hall is my 5th to last in. Michigan State is my 6th to last in.
You want to talk about Michigan State,
Are you sold
don't
on Michigan State?
Kerry brought up a great point earlier today. He compared Virginia Tech to Michigan State, and I thought it was a terrific comparison because both have 7 losses against Quad One.
They're
Who
both,
has more wins against Quad One?
yeah, Virginia Tech does. They're both 4-9 against Quad 1 and 2 combined. Like, we
This
people
is
say all
Notre
the
Dame
time.
of 2022,
Yeah,
isn't it? Like
yeah.
that's really what we're talking about.
We say all the time, like, it's not your net that matters, it's your opponent's net that matters. And that's supposed to be true. The only real argument for Michigan State is their predictive metrics, which the net is a predictive metric at the end of the day. Uh, Even if you ignore that they're 21 in the net, it's the fact that they're 17 and a half in the predictives that they're still kind of comfortably in the field, even though, yeah, if you compare their 4 best wins side by side with Virginia Tech, neither of them have anything close to a bad loss. Not much of a difference between them, and I don't think Virginia Tech is that close. They're my 4th team out, so they're kind of close. But I also would not really, if today was Selection Sunday, I would not be going to bat for Virginia Tech.
No, and on that note, do you think Michigan State has the worst loss between the two? I think you could argue that James Madison at home is a worse loss than Virginia Tech has.
Yeah, I don't even remember what Virginia Tech's worst is. It might be Miami at home. I
That's what I
think
was gonna say.
it's
What is it?
not.
Miami at home?
Yeah,
Like it's
they don't have.
not bad.
Neither of them have a Q3 or Q4. The Madison loss might be becoming Q3 pretty soon for Michigan State. Maybe that'll scare people away because they'll no longer have such a clean resume. But yeah, they're my 6th to last in. I'm not confident that they're getting in anymore. But the actual last 4 in: Cincinnati, um, Ole Miss, St. John's, and Mississippi State. We already covered 3 of the 4. Cincinnati, I know they have that great win over BYU. Looks like one of the best resume wins of all, but only 2 Quad 1 wins, 4-6 overall against the top 2 quadrants, which is better than Michigan State's 4-9. But they also have a bad loss on their resume.
I've got a theme in my last 4 in
Okay.
and first 4 out.
Is it all SEC and
I'm
Big East?
well, we got a lot of SEC and Big East, which makes bracketing very tough, by the way.
Yeah.
Especially because these leagues keep, for some reason, throwing a bunch of teams on the 5 line as well, which just like when you just have a bunch of SEC and Big East teams hanging out on the 5 and 6 line, as well as the 11 and 12 line, bracketing nightmare. But aside from that, I do definitely have a theme between my last 4 and first
Okay.
4 out. And I'm going to see if you can figure out what that theme is.
Oh, double trivia. I love it.
My last 4 in:
Okay.
Seton Hall, Mississippi State, Nevada, Providence. My first 4 out: Ole Miss, St. John's, Colorado, Kansas State. There's one dominating factor between those 2 lists.
Just Quad 1 wins? I don't know.
The group that's in is 15 and 18 total in Quad 1.
Uh-huh.
Almost 500. The group that's out, 5 and 18.
Little worse.
Just missing the 1 in front of the 5. That is a complete game changer on the bubble. All these teams are right next to each other, but what separates these teams for me is the teams in have gotten it done against Quad 1, teams out have not. And at the end of the year, if those teams just out of the field don't fix that, they're going to stay out of the field. And if those teams just in don't keep up those good Q1 records, they're on the bubble not because what they've done against Q1. That's good. That's the reason they're in the field. It's all the other stuff that will start to overshadow them if they don't keep those Q1 records up. Because that's really the only reason teams like Seton Hall and Providence are in the field right now. It's because they're good against Q1. If that disappears, their resume disappears with it.
Yeah, I mean, got to beat quality opponents. Seton Hall's done it. Providence has done it. And granted, there's nothing but opportunity in the Big East aside from Georgetown and DePaul. But my first 4 out, I have Nevada and Providence as my first 2 out, and I didn't like it. Again, it's an inertia thing. I had them out a couple days ago. St. John's didn't lose. Mississippi State didn't lose. I'm just fine. I'll leave it. But I see they're 4-2 against Quad 1. Nevada is. Providence is 4-5. if I really scrubbed it, I probably would move those two teams. And then Xavier and Virginia Tech, I think, are a pretty strong, you know, seed line below those two teams. Um, they're third and fourth out, but it feels like they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that I think we should probably just quickly mention
Okay.
is if you don't play, that doesn't mean your resume doesn't change. Like that's a concept that I think a lot of fans really don't understand. Like we have not played in 4 days. How could you possibly move us from X, Y, Z spot to, double A spot, whatever it is?
Yeah.
There's so many things happening all the time. Even if you don't play, your opponents get better or worse. They don't even have to move within the quads necessarily. They still just look better or worse. Your metrics get better or worse. Other teams pass you.
Yeah,
Other teams
that's
fall behind
that's the
you.
bigger one. Teams around you moving more so than the teams that you've already played, but yeah, it does change your resume.
Yeah, I mean, it does, what was Virginia Tech? They were probably 2-7 a day or two ago. When you look at the net, now they're 3-7, and that could change again.
Yeah.
Like who knows? You got NC State's right on the edge of 75. Clemson's right on the edge of 30.
Yeah.
Boise State's right on the edge of 50. They could wake up on right when the committee starts going over those final at-larges and be like, committee could be like, oh, well, look at all those quad one wins. Or they could be like, they don't have any quad one wins.
Yeah.
And when you're that close, sometimes you just get lucky. What day does the committee actually go to look at these things? That could be the difference. So actually, we've talked about this before. That's why I'm on selection week. That Wednesday, I try to match to a T what I think the committee's doing every day, because it's not what records I'm looking at. It's what records they're looking at
Yeah.
that I'm concerned about.
I wish I had that luxury. I gotta put out my bracket like on Monday of selection week, and then I gotta be updating it constantly because that's what they pay me to do. But
Well, anything else you want to talk about, Carrie?
I think we hit on Michigan State, right? No, I'm good.
I have Michigan State at 11 too. I think they're in real danger if they
Yeah.
don't pick up some road wins,
Yeah.
especially because Baylor is kind of the X factor. Does the committee look at that Baylor neutral site
Yep.
win and say that's a Baylor neutral site win, or do they say Detroit? You played them in Detroit.
During finals week, no less, when we saw Creighton go and lose at UNLV, like it was a weird time of year that there were crazy results, and Baylor just didn't even show up in the first half of that game. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There are a lot of teams that need to win on the road, and Michigan State is definitely one of them. Practically the whole Big Ten needs to win on the road. Nebraska and Northwestern both also on the bubble because they can't win on the road.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and we will see you Sunday, which happens to be Super Bowl Sunday.
Ooh, how about them? Chiefs?
Bye, everybody.